I'm Gregor Martinos. I am the host of this little show, and I'm the maintainer of GitHub's AutoCate, which is the official SDKs for all their platform APIs. And yeah, with me today, I have Jeff Wilcox. Jeff, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jeff from Microsoft, and I work on our open source programs office where we really try to help and make GitHub easy for everyone. And we have about 35,000 users using GitHub.com, and we're very heavy users of AutoKit, so huge fans.
Well, thanks. Thanks for the kind words. Okay, so I asked on Twitter if anyone has any questions or ideas of things I could make a show about, and you were one of the first to respond. And it was about auditing repository access in a GitHub organization. And yeah, this is what we are going to do today. Could you just give us a little bit background and motivation of what you would like to, of how you would like to use it at Microsoft?
Yeah, so we have something very similar and basic today. And we can go to the audit log through the API if we need to get some information, but we don't have like a historical record of all of that. And so I think what we'd love to do is just start kind of having an action that runs regularly so that we can store, what teams have access and what privilege levels. So in the future, we can always go back and kind of get records and understand that things have changed. And if someone also, removed themselves from a team accidentally, we could always go back and review the log to understand if they actually used to have that access level and then help them kind of help themselves.
Okay, awesome. So let's hope we can get this going today. I will build this as a GitHub Action. And, you can kind of look over my shoulder and ask any questions if something is unclear, if I go too fast. And if anyone is interested to learn more about how to get started with GitHub Actions, I made another show on that, basically creating like a hello world kind of GitHub Action with JavaScript. So today I will start out with like a baseline GitHub Action and take it from there. So I prepared this repository here and I already made it public. So the action will be called GitHub Organization Repository Auditing, to be as clear as possible.
That's an awesome name.
But the code you see here is still the Hello World action from the Hello World JS action repository, which I use as a template. But I also started out an initial version branch where I started to create a README of basically how I would like this action to work. So nothing exists yet, but I try to start with the documentation and then make it work backwards. And for this GitHub action to work, we actually need to authenticate as in GitHub App, which might be confusing. But if you run a GitHub action, you get the GitHub token by default from the GitHub action runner. But this GitHub token only gives you access to the current repository. But for what we want to build, we want to have access to all repositories and across the entire GitHub organization. So we will register a GitHub app and use that as a means of access and authorization. So I will just follow these instructions here right now and register a GitHub app on our test organization, which is called OpenContoso. Jeff, you set this up. Like, what's the meaning of Contoso? Is there some meaning behind that?
Contoso is like the official Microsoft demo company name. I believe it's even trademarked. And so we're allowed to use Contoso for anything for demos.
Okay, for the record, I hope I'm not getting into any legal trouble here.
Oh, that's awesome. We even have our own Contoso Enterprise in GitHub.
That's great. So I prepared a link here. In the settings of your GitHub organization, you can go down to developer settings and then go to GitHub apps. And this is how you can register a GitHub app for your organization. We already have two for testing, but I will start out with a new one here, and we will just call it OpenContoso, just like the organization. with a description of what it will do. We need to add a homepage URL actually, so I will just use the organization's GitHub URL. And then usually when you work with GitHub apps, you interact with webhooks, which are requests that GitHub sends to your server, but we will not use that at all. We will not run our own server anywhere. So I just disabled webhooks altogether. And then in terms of permissions, which for GitHub apps are quite granular compared to the OAuth tokens, we need the administration permission with read access. So we can access repository teams. And in the organization permissions, we need members, so we can access teams and their members. But it's only read-only access. So with this GitHub app, if anyone would get access, they can read data, but they cannot manipulate anything. And I only want to install it on this account, so nobody else would be able to install this account on their user account or GitHub organization. Okay, so now we registered the GitHub app, which now gives us credentials, which for one is the app ID, which we will need, and also the private key. So I will just start out here by storing this app ID in our code in a .env file. It's like a convention to define environment variables. So I would say just app ID for local testing. And then I will also add a private key here, which we will generate now, which usually, probably I shouldn't screen share this because this is a credential that is sensitive, but good luck typing 1,200 characters just to get access to some test app. And also after the show, I can just replace this private key. So I need to store it as an environmental variable, which does not support new lines. So first I need to replace all the line breaks with \n. And then I can store this as private key here. So now we have the credentials for our app. Next, how do we access these credentials? Well, for Node, there is this really cool package called .env. So I will install .env. Or env. I think it's .env. Yeah.
I think so. I think I'm using it in one of my apps here.
Yeah, it's like one of these packages I'm using a ton for Node CLI projects.
I will say one of the things I like here is that you're building a GitHub Action from the start. I think a lot of the GitHub apps I built, we're running in Kubernetes, and it's rather complicated. And Actions just is like a free platform to run that. It's so much simpler.
Yeah, no, it's really great. It was such a revolution, really, for me to be able to use GitHub Actions when it came out, similar to when GitHub introduced pull requests. Like that's the kind of disruption this caused to me. So this is the hello world code still, which we don't really need. We will need the core package later to log data and to set output, so we can leave that. But then we now require the .env package and call config on it. And this is how all the environment variables now become available. So when I do console log process.env app ID and run this code, then I see my app ID here, and I could do the same with the private key. Okay, so now we have access to credentials through environment variables. Now, how do we authenticate as the GitHub app and iterate through all these repositories and teams and so on? So for that, I installed the AutoKit package. Surprise.
What a good choice.
The AutoKit package is actually pretty new. It's a very decomposable architecture, and I work on all the underlying packages, but the AutoKit package is now available. It's like the all batteries included package. And then, if you don't need all the functionality, you can kind of drill down and only use what you need. But for this demo, I will use the Authenticates package.
And how do you compare this to Probot?
Probot is built on Authenticates.
Yeah.
So Probot is basically an opinionated framework, and it's built on these Authenticates libraries, while the Authenticates is an SDK, it's a library. So I like this explanation of a framework is it calls me, it calls my code, and the library is I call the library in my code. So framework kind of like Probot makes it really, really quick to build apps because it hides even more complexity from you, as long as you work within the scope of Probot. As soon as you want to build something that Probot is not made for, you will get in trouble. And then it's easier to work with the underlying libraries directly. But yeah, definitely check out Probot, the GitHub App framework that I'm also maintaining.
Cool.
Okay, so let's require Authenticates now. And from the Authenticates package, I import the app constructor, which is basically the SDK for GitHub Apps. So, and now I can create an instance here, new app, and I set the app ID to the environment variable, and I do the same for private key, private key. So that should work. And in order to check that it actually works, I will run a request as the app and then log out the current name of it. So I will just define an asynchronous function here, which I directly execute. So that will make it easier to use async code. And in here, I can now do something like this. And then await app authenticates rest apps. So you see you get all these IntelliSense here. And then I think there is a method called get authenticated. Yeah. And then console log app info name and maybe app info HTML URL. Okay. Let's run this and see what happens and hope for the demo gods to be with us. Okay, so this is it. This is the name of our app, OpenContorso, and this is the URL from which we can install it. Talking about installing, I actually have to install it on our organization because installing is basically the process of granting access for the GitHub app to repositories. In our case, because I want to audit all the repositories in here, I give it access to all existing and future repositories. So now it's installed. Now we can iterate through all the repositories the app has access to. Does it all make sense so far?
Definitely.
Okay.
I guess the one question I'll have is with actions, everything is essentially stateless.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one of the challenges I've had is when we're doing a lot of things like reading all the repos, I want to use a conditional request usually and have either a proxy or my own, existing version of the object available, or else I run out of GitHub API requests really quickly. So I guess I'm interested in how you might handle that if you had thousands of repos, because I think I only have like 25,000 API tokens an hour.
That's a very good question. So the Authenticates package comes with plugins which takes care of throttling for you. So it will run slower, but it takes care of making sure that you do not hit your rate limit. And if you do, it will wait and retry later. And there are also some logic in there to avoid the abuse limits. Abuse limits are not documented in detail, but there are some best practices. For example, if you create things like comments or new issues, everything that creates a notification to our users, you have to throttle even more. So what we do, all mutating requests, we throttle to 1 per second. And all the special mutating requests, which also trigger notifications, we throttle to 3 per second. And then there are some extra throttling rules for GraphQL and for search APIs and some more. But basically, you don't have to worry about it. It's all built into AutoKit.
That's a big difference then from the REST.js library, where I have to go add those. Got it.
Yeah, you have to manually add the throttling plugin. But with the AutoKit, we thought it's part of the GitHub developer documentation. It's best practice. So we decided this should be part of the core.
That's great.
Okay, so what I can do now is I can use the asynchronous iterator, which is basically for each repository iterator. And now it's for await, I think. And then I get AutoKit, which is now a pre-authenticated AutoKit instance for this installation, and the repository for this iteration. So in here, I should now be able to say console log repository full name. Something is wrong. I have a syntax error here. Oh, it's not equal, it's off. Okay. So just to test this out, let me run this again and see if it will now iterate through all the repositories it is installed on. Yep.
Cool.
So these are the repositories we have. It's like a secret audit test, which I already tested this out, so I am not getting too much stuck during the show. And then we have a code repository, a documentation repository, a secret project, and a website. And maybe at this point, let me show you the teams we have in the organization, so you get an idea what we've built here. So we have like these test teams based on the different permission levels that you can assign to a team that you invite to a repository, which is admin, maintain, write, triage, and read is the lowest permission. And we have all these teams with some members just for testing, and we invited these teams to our test repositories with the different permissions. Okay, let's see. What's next? So we can iterate through all repositories. And now it's important to understand that I cannot use the app ID and private key credentials to send a request to any repository because this is the app authentication. I instead need to authenticate as the installation. And the installation is expiring access token that the app needs to create based on the installation ID. And then I can use that installation access token to authenticate requests. But I don't need to worry about it because this is all taken care of for me when I use this AutoKit instance that the iterator provides me here. So what I need to do is to iterate through all the teams. So it's repos, and there is a list team. List teams request in here, and the options I need to pass is the owner, which is the repository that I get from my iterator as well, owner login, oops, and then the repo, which is the repository name. Okay, so now I should be able to just get this data with await, and maybe let's add a actually let's not use console log. Let's use the core info API to log to in a way that is sustainable by the GitHub Actions, and it has some advantages. So I could say like authenticated as app name, and then just add the URL here. So that will make it a little bit nicer. We can also log this as a debug information because it's not that relevant. But here we should say core info and say auditing and then the repository name. Okay, and then this is just for debugging, so I will use console log right now. This is just temporary, just to see if it works. What we should now get is for every repository, we should get the array of all the team objects, which is what we're getting here, like the read team and the admin team and their permissions. So the read team has the pull permission, which is just an alias for read, and the admin team has the admin permission, and the maintain team has the maintain permission, and this is for the open Contoso website repository. Okay. So we have that information now. The problem with list teams is all the list APIs do not return all the teams we want. If we have more than 30 teams, we would only get the first 30. What we can do is add a per page parameter here, and we can set it up to 100. But you're Microsoft, and I don't know what numbers of teams you are having, so even that might not be enough.
We do a lot of paging, lots and lots of paging.
Yeah, so luckily, Authenticates has a pagination API and just does take care of all that for you. So I can pass the request method as a first argument, which is just an alias basically for the REST API route. And then I can pass in the parameters here. And now I do not receive a response with a data key, but instead I get basically all the teams. And even if there were 300, it would return 300 at once here. And then we can maybe iterate through the teams here. So team of teams, and then do something like core info and say team name with permission. We have to figure this out. Okay.
By the way, I can see here that I have 267 pages with 100 per page of teams.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Well, this action will just run very slowly, but if you run it at 2 a.m. at night, what do you care, right? And
as long as I respect that GitHub API.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that the throttling should take care of all the problems that you don't hit your rate limit. And as I said, the installation of authentication token is expiring as well. So if you do this for 1 hour, 1 minute later, the request would fail. But this Authenticates instance you're getting takes care of that as well. So if your installation access token expires, it will just re-authenticate transparently for you in the background. So that's another thing of complexity that Authenticates can just take away from you, which is really nice. So all this to say, you should be fine, even with that amount of repositories and teams that you're having at Microsoft. Okay, so let's log this. Let's see if that works. Okay. So next thing we want is to actually find out these permissions. And I prepared a helper for this, so I'm not losing too much time. Let me just paste them here. And the helper you're interested in is to normalize the permissions object. And I said, they use push because of legacy reasons for the write permission, and they use pull for read. So we kind of normalize this object that we receive from the API to the string permission that we want. Okay. So basically what I need to do now is say normalize permission and then say team permissions. And you will see that TypeScript says there is no permissions key, but there actually is. I think it's a problem with the OpenAPI specification. And I filed an issue with GitHub about that. So that should be resolved soon in the OpenAPI spec. And once it's in the OpenAPI spec, it will trickle down to our TypeScript definitions pretty automatically.
So that's something that's driven me a little crazy, is that it's really inconsistent in the GitHub API, whether it's the text version with a string, or if it's actually this object that's expanded with Booleans.
It is. Yeah. Let them know about it, No, they are well aware. This is a REST API that's been going on for over 10 years now, and there was no breaking change. So, there is a value in that, but this is the result. There are just a lot of inconsistencies. And there is a GraphQL API that we are not using today, which has a better model for deprecating and changing things. With REST API, it's a little harder. But, we will see what the future brings. So run this, and let's see if we are getting the right permission strings. Yep. So this is basically our audit now, right? We go through all repositories about an audit task has no teams added. And then in code, we see the triage. Basically, all our teams are added with the respective permissions. Does that look good to you?
That's everything. That's great.
Okay. So next up, we want to use that information and write it somehow to a log file. That is the idea. And this is what we can use the core API from the Actions core package, and we can set output, which is the GitHub steps output, here repositories, and then we can write it to some kind of string. We only strings are supported, no objects or anything, because internally this is all working with environment variables. But basically here we can add the JSON of the repositories we want to log. So I will create a repositories array here. And then I created this other util method, which basically reduces the amount of data that we are interested in. Instead of storing all this data we get from GitHub's API response, we are only interested in the repository ID and name, especially the ID because names can change, but IDs cannot. And the same with the teams. So each repository will have a teams property with an ID and the name, and also the slug, which is an alternative for URLs, and then the normalize permission that we've already seen in the logging, right? So I can just use this and then pass in the repository and the teams, and I will get what I want. So I can say repositories push, and then to log item, the current repository and the teams array that I received in line 21. And then I can do JSON stringify this repository object, and we should see a special log output, which is a command to GitHub Actions to write this array, which is here. You see : set output, and then the name of the output is repositories, and then : and this is the object that we want to write to our log file, right? Okay, so I think we basically have everything now for our action. So, we do not want to commit the .env file. This is not a good idea. Oops. So we can ignore. We don't. Well, I'm not sure about this. Anyway, I will remove it for now. And ignore the .env file, but also remove this folder here. Okay, so now we do not see the .env file, so that is good. And yeah, I would just add it all. Feature initial version and push it to our pull request that I already opened for this, and then I can view this pull request in my browser using GH, the new CLI from the GitHub CLI team.
Fancy.
Shout out, yeah, they do great work there. Okay, so next up, I want to test this in this repository. Basically, I want to run the same action in this repository, and for that, I first need to add the same secrets here. So I would add, maybe I use like an open contoso app ID prefix for the app ID. Let me get it from my .env file. And then let's do another one open Contoso private key. And let me add the private key here. Now, again, I can actually add new lines to GitHub secrets. So I can paste the for private key here, and now it's available to me. And now I have a test workflow in this repository that basically can run itself. And this is what I used for the Hello World one here. And then I used Node to basically run an assert on the output of it. So first, I can just remove all this stuff. And then I can say, let's call this audit. And this is the README example. And then I need to pass environment variables. So I need to say app ID with secrets app ID. Oops. And then private key with an underscore. Okay, and this is how I can set environment variables on GitHub Actions. On GitHub Actions, obviously there is no .env file, but the same environment variables will exist as well through GitHub Actions. So I think this should be good, and then we can run, and I think it's echo, and then just use the step output here, which I forgot the syntax for.
The syntax always drives me crazy. I always end up committing a lot of actions files. We're trying to run them locally with one of those apps.
Okay, let me just go back here because we had it before. Okay. So steps dot and then the ID of your step, which is audit dot outputs, and then the name of your output, which in our case is repositories, right? And this should log out the JSON that we set in the output in the code. Okay, now I can remove this file here. And one more thing we need to do is to update our action YAML. So this is basically the action manifest. So what is the name of our action? And it is like an organization repository audits. I don't think we can use GitHub in the name. I think there is a rule about that, and I don't want it to appear as if it was official, so I just call it that. And audit access to all repositories across an organization. Okay, then we have branding. We can change that later. Now inputs and outputs. We do not have any inputs. We just use environment variables. You could use inputs as an alternative, but we don't need to. And outputs is repositories. Okay, and then the JSON string for the audited repositories. Okay, sounds good. Runs on Node 12, and it runs this file. And again, I created this other show about these basics, where this dist and so on comes from. So I will not go into that right now. But that should be it. And then update test workflow and action YAML here. Okay.
Wow, the first time is always the best.
Well, let's see what's happening. Hey, did it just work on the first run? Did you see that? I'm so
Hopefully
happy.
this is being recorded.
This is, oh my God, I hope so. Well, we have some comments there from Nick and Tierney. Hey, friends. So I hope someone is seeing this. So this is amazing. So this is the same output that we saw in my local machine. And then this is the second step now, where we basically just echo, and then the steps output was replaced with the actual string, which is why we see it twice here. But that works, so that is great. And with that, we have our action. So let's merge this in.
You make it look so easy.
I've been doing this for a while, and so I don't want to say that it is that easy. There's a lot of things that can go wrong and you get stuck, but then you can ask me. That's what
Nick
my
here
job
is saying that if it works the first time, your error logging is broken.
Exactly. And it's not like I had any tests, right? So this is another thing from the show I mentioned. Basically, I have releases automated. So what's happening now is it builds the code into a single JavaScript file, and then it stores this to the dist index.js, and it automatically creates a new release on GitHub, and it pushes it to the v1.x branch. So you can depend on this action using the v1.x branch, and you will receive all bugs and features without anything that would break your code, because then I would create v2.x. So now I think that our recommended usage here should work, right? So this action now exists, and we can actually test it for real. Are you okay with time?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the action exists now. Now let's put it to work. So open control. So let's create a new repository here and just call it audit. And well, we can make it public, but usually I guess you would keep this private. Repository to run our audit action. Create with a README. Looks good. Now let's create a new file in GitHub workflows audit YAML. So this is automatically a GitHub Action workflow now. It's using my action from my repository with the v1.x, as I said, and we are passing app ID and private key, which I still need to define in this repository. And then you can see the triggers. So this will run at 4 a.m. Pacific time every day automatically. And then it also has a workflow dispatch trigger, which allows me to run it manually. Okay, so next let's create the secrets.
I have to imagine that someone at GitHub has a record of all the cron job times and knows when they're going to get slammed every day with actions. That's awesome.
Okay, I just love that they gave us scheduled actions. This is so powerful, and it's a great reason to use actions over apps. And in fact, if your GitHub app receives webhooks but also has a cron job, you can actually use the GitHub app's credentials and run the cron jobs in GitHub Actions. Isn't that cool?
I did not know that.
That is a cool trick. I hope it doesn't go against GitHub's terms of use. I'm not a legal person, but I think it's okay. I mean, you will pay for this GitHub Action time at some point, especially if it's a private repository. So this is the private key.
I won't tell you how many minutes we use on the Microsoft account, but we pay for a lot.
Well, you're daddy now of GitHub, so I guess the money stays in the house, right?
Yeah, the Satya money bag.
Okay. Oh, they say there's some syntax error here on line 19. Of course. Something had to go wrong. Like, it couldn't go that well. That was not possible. So what do you want from me? Oh, I know. Sorry. I forgot the dash sign here. Okay.
Typical YAML.
Yeah, but at least you get some intelligence when you added these on GitHub. They give you like you saw this red underlines and so on. So now this is the workflow dispatch thing. It gives me this button, which is really cool. So I can just trigger my action whenever I want to for testing, and this is perfect for what we are doing here. Okay, so now let's hope this will all work. Say hello world is probably not what we want to call it, but we can fix this later. So here it's loading my action. You see again the same output and the echo, everything works, so that's great. So next, we want to actually write it to a log file. And we're running a little bit out of time, so I think I will just copy and paste this from where I already created it. So this is our action, and we don't want to say hello world, we just call it audit. And then I have this audit test repository where I kind of try it out if this will actually all work. And I will copy some things here and then explain them. So we no longer want to echo anything. Instead, we want to write to an audit ND.json log file. And we also want to add a timestamp. So here, basically, I use the same internal syntax to create a new output, which is timestamp. And I set it to the like ISO standard timestamp thing with year, month, day, and then the time. And then I use, I basically echo the current timestamp here, and then the repositories here, and I either create or I add a new line to an audit ND.json log file. So ND.json stands for new line delimiters JSON, which is like a standard format for log files. And then I actually need to check out the repository because now I need to write code back. So I can say actions checkout, and I think they are in version 2. So let me just quickly check it out here.
That feels familiar.
GitHub Actions checkout. Yeah, version 2. So let me just copy this here. So now I checked out and I have my code in this action locally checked out and also authenticated. So now I can commit this new file or the updated file and then push it back to the same repository. Okay, so let's do this. And now let's run this action again and see. I missed the comments from Twitch, but yeah, I appreciate you guys. Yeah, some people like this Twitch, this fancy Twitch, streamers, they have like a ticker at the bottom that I think is so cool, and I want that too, but I did not yet figure out how that works. Okay, so something happened here, and it had no errors. So if everything goes well, we now, yeah, there it is. So this is our log file. Here's the timestamp in UTC. And then this is the repository output. So basically we're done. We can check in tomorrow again and see if the schedule worked. And if we check in the same day tomorrow, there should be a second line with the audit of that respective day. So I think we accomplished everything we wanted here.
Yeah, that's everything.
So we added even the timestamp to the log output. Well, we didn't iterate to collaborators, but I can say something about that. There is a method like list teams for list collaborators, and you can pass affiliation direct. So that way you get all direct user accounts which have been added directly to a repository, not through teams. However, the permissions key does not include triage and maintain. And I think this is something you run into as well, right?
Yeah. That's what brought me into this world of thinking, gosh, is it even possible?
I'm sure it's possible. I could probably check it out and figure it out using GraphQL. But this is, I'm pretty sure this is a bug. So I already created an issue like a discussion in GitHub.community in the ecosystem API forum, and they are very responsive there. So I hope that they will figure this out. And once they do, I can update this issue here, so you can subscribe to our issue here in the help desk repository. And I will let you know this way when I edit the collaborators auditing as well. But for today, that's all we get.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's great. It's amazing seeing it come together so quickly.
Well, I'm amazed too, to be honest. And I want to thank you again for taking your time to join me today and to bringing this interesting idea. And yeah, everyone else who was watching, thank you so much for coming in. And I will have another stream on Monday at noon Pacific time. And we will talk about serial port for Node and how we use GitHub Actions to create native bindings for all the different operating systems and use GitHub Actions artifacts to upload these binaries, and then use another action step to kind of gather all these artifacts and publish a package including all these binaries. So it will be a very interesting orchestrating exercise with GitHub Actions on Monday at noon. Okay, thanks again, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks for having me.